semiconductor and IT industry stalwart. He has been in the industry for over 30 years and has led many multi-million dollar global businesses. He has given his expertise to several technical and advisory committees at the national level, including being the president of India Electronics and Semiconductor Association. Currently, he is the co-founder and CEO of Van Consultancy Private Limited, and he helps companies chart out their strategies for success. For his unparalleled contribution to VLSI and embedded systems industry, he was conferred with the prestigious Silicon India Mentor Graphics Award. Sir, we are privileged to have you amidst us, and I will request you to now come onto the stage and address the gathering. Thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Turns out I'm in the wrong uniform for this conference. Somebody should have told me. I've spent too much time doing public policy, and when you do consulting, you go from your night dress to a suit and back to a night dress. There are no in-betweens. So what I've been asked to speak about today is the confluence of innovation and mobility and the opportunities for entrepreneurship that result from that. And this is an interesting topic because essentially what happens when you have this confluence of innovation and mobility is a chance to re-examine or reimagine India, as I like to call it. And there are multiple examples we'll talk about. Very mindful of time. When I timed myself, now I must make a confession, I've come from a sales and marketing background, so engineering folks always make a joke of sales guys that we actually do our presentations while driving to the customer site. I was slightly better, I finished at 12:30, so. So let me try and keep the anecdotes limited, and I don't know if we have time for Q&A at the end, but I'm very mindful of the fact I'm the last speaker of the day, so you probably don't want me going on for too long. So let me set context for where, what is it that we're talking about? Because with all due respect, one of the most fascinating industries to be in at this point in time in India is electronics, or what we call electronic system design and manufacturing. So I know that you've been listening to presentations since morning. Probably a lot of this stuff is known to you, so I'm going to be very, very quick. We are a young country. We are, 60% of the population is below the age of 25. The demographic dividend, as it's called, helps us quite a bit. 10th largest economy in the world, 3rd largest in PPP terms, purchasing power parity. And as long as we can get over this quarter and the next quarter and get currency back in circulation, I think we should continue with our 7.6% growth rate. And of course, in my previous avatar, when I ran the IESA, I used to very nicely tell all my foreign visitors that of the top 125 semiconductor companies in the world, 120 of them have a presence in India, either directly or indirectly. And of course, out of the Fortune 500 list, at least half of them already have a presence in India. And of course, with Make in India and Digital India, you're seeing a lot more interest. Every day we see a new announcement. So this is the snapshot of our little part of the world, the electronics industry, or what we call ESDM, Electronic System Design and Manufacturing, which is essentially 5 things. First is all the systems that you and I use, TVs, set-top boxes, of course the ubiquitous mobile phone, medical, consumer, industrial electronics, all of that. The second is the semiconductor component used in that. So all the chips that go into powering these devices. Sadly, we don't have fabrication capability in the country. We do have one fab in Chandigarh, which is limited to 0.18. But the holy dream that a lot of us have been working towards is to try and get digital fabrication capability in the country. Third is chip design and embedded software. And it's now well accepted over the last at least 10 years that there is probably no semiconductor chip in the world which is not touched by India in some way. And that is roughly 10% of the total ESDM market of just under $110 billion a year currently. Fourth, components, actives, passives, connectors, power supplies, wiring harnesses. There's a fair amount of local manufacturing that happens there. And the final is exports. About 10% of our total market of 110 billion is exports. Can it grow more? Of course. One of the reasons why I made the statement that this industry is phenomenally exciting. Of course, you will agree with me, some of the most exciting people in the country work in this industry, right? But apart from that, this is an industry which is growing at close to 30% compounded annual growth rate. So from a base of $45 billion in 2009, it should go to 400 billion by 2020. Bear in mind the forecast was made in 2009. And those of you who remember the Indian economy in that time frame, we all assumed that 9% GDP growth rate was our God-given right. We had a recession, 2011. We had, in the previous regime, we had some amount of slowdown in policy implementation, and then we had an election. But now we're coming back on track. A key differentiator about the Indian electronics industry, because if you operate in this space, then your comparison automatically is China. The key differentiator is the Indian demand is domestically driven. The Chinese industry grows, 60% of it is exports. So as they say, if the United States catches a cold, China catches pneumonia. So this also means, and the growth in India is driven by the demographic demand, the youngsters, all of that. And those of you who will come from Bangalore, every time you see a new apartment coming up on your way to work or on your way home, you will say, oh, that's more traffic, that's more cars, that's more bikes. I would say every apartment is a minimum of one television set, maybe two. It's one refrigerator, one washing machine, at least 2 or 3 mobile phones, maybe many more screens, and that's much more electronics. So, देखने की नजरिया है. Those of you who live in Bangalore and are on routes which are serviced by the call center taxis, the ubiquitous Indica, it has 32 microprocessors on it. So every time the Indica meets with an accident, the Bangalorean says, damn, traffic is getting bad. The semicon sales guy says, yeah, my next year's target is easier met. So this is a market which is growing. And if you look at it, we just did a snapshot. This is from 2013, when I ran the IESA. And we said, what are the products which sort of contribute? So no surprises. India has this perpetual love affair with the mobile phone. 40% of all our electronics consumption is the handset. I'm sure you had an exhaustive PhD thesis presentation on the handset market in the morning, so I won't go there. But these 10 products there represent 70% of the total demand in value terms for all the electronics we consume in this country. So this was just to set context to the point I'm trying to build, which is the scope for innovation. The problem with the Indian electronics consumption and we consume electronics like it's going out of fashion. The problem with this is that we have very little in-house manufacturing capacity. 65% of all the electronics we consume is outright imported. Container ships come into Chennai or Mumbai, and then goods go out further from there. Of the 35% that is so-called manufactured here, and I'm being very careful with my choice of words, so-called manufactured here, Less than 15% is what we call high value add manufacturing, which means there is greater than 50% value addition happening on those products. Good case in point, the mobile phone assembly cluster that has come up at Tirupati, not very far from Bangalore. The only value addition happening there is boys and girls taking these components out of their boxes and snap fitting them onto plastic cases. So what we are doing is labor cost arbitrage. 6% if we are lucky as a nation. And the goal constantly, what we have done through the policy enablement framework under the National Policy of Electronics 2012 is to relentlessly increase the local sourcing, local value addition components. Unfortunately, even the value add in terms of embedded software is not recognized in India because a lot of the patents are filed outside. So there's a whole framework that has been created, which I'll talk about later in my presentation. But the challenge for India is how do you, okay, I'll put it bluntly. Today, India grows, China benefits. How can we have a situation where India grows and India benefits? That, very simply, is the challenge for the Indian electronics industry. So that was context setting, the why is this industry so important to talk about. You know, there are challenges, but the payouts in terms of if we can solve those challenges is huge. So back to innovation, mobility, and entrepreneurship. I'm being very courageous here when I come in front of a company like Qualcomm, which is, what, you have 90% of the smartphone market and probably 50% of the total mobility market. So I'm going to come in here and give you a proposition. I'm going to treat mobility as infrastructure. I'm not going to talk about mobility. I'm not going to talk about 5G and everything else because, you guys do that for a living. I talk about it for a living, right? So I'm not going to go and talk about the technologies in mobility, but I'm going to give you an argument as to how can you reimagine India if you take mobility as infrastructure, and then what is the innovation, how can you build completely new class of products and services based on that. So I'm going to do this very quickly. A lot of people confuse invention and innovation, not the same. Invention is if you build completely, radically new a product typically, but it could be a radically new service. But innovation is if you can improve on it. And in both these cases, India loves jugaad. Kaise bhi kuch karo, band-aid lagao aur chalao gaadi ko. The electronics industry has learned over time that jugaad is the opposite of great. It's just not good enough. So everything that we have done from a policy perspective is to try and eliminate jugaad and go from good to great. And all the policy enablements, the frameworks, the infrastructure for innovation that has been created looks at how do we push the envelope there from that perspective. So prerequisites for innovation infrastructure, first is incubators or, in some cases, accelerators. Particularly if you live in Bangalore, a lot of you will think that an incubation center is a nice air-conditioned office with cubicle space. Nothing could be further from the truth. And a lot of people are making, lots of these real estate guys have got into building incubation centers. My contention is if you're an entrepreneur, particularly if you're an entrepreneur in the semicon space, and you're not smart enough to find office space, then you probably will never tape out at all. So the incubators that when I was at IESA we did with the government, and now some of the consulting assignments I do, we have rethought incubators. So in 2013, together with the Software Technology Parks of India, STPI, we set up an incubator in Delhi University for electronics. And we said, of course, there is some office space because kids from DU have to come and work. But we said, look, we tied with a distribution company and made commonly available, commonly needed parts in stock, a certain percentage, so that at least your proof of concept could be realized quickly. We tied up with a couple of test and equipment companies and brought a fully functional lab in there. So whether it was oscilloscopes or traffic generators at the lower end and some of the other equipment at the higher end, we set up a fully functional lab there. We brought in a network of mentors, business mentors, technology mentors. And then we added a layer of administrative support where we said, you know, let these engineers focus on core engineering. So admin, HR, accounting, all of that was taken care of in the incubator. Of course, the incubator takes a small stake in the company, but there were conditions to make sure that the entrepreneur does not get a raw deal when he or she either exits the incubator or, you know, scales and outgrows the incubator. Second, very important, availability of risk capital. This continues to be a problem for the electronics industry. Somehow the VCs love e-commerce companies which, at last count, in the last 10 years, have never made any money. They all lose money. Electronics companies, on the other hand, try very hard to make sure they make money. But anyway, institutionally, what has been done in 2010-12 is that we have created an electronic development fund under the aegis of the Government of India. So 10,000 crores has been earmarked. And the fund is managed through SIDBI and CanBank Ventures. So it's run as a private venture fund. You get evaluated exactly as a VC firm would look at you. But this is slightly more patient. It doesn't expect you to do an exit strategy in 3 years, because in 3 years you probably aren't in mass production anyway. You wouldn't be making money there. Third, IPR and supporting development of domestic IPR, at the same time giving a subsidy to an entrepreneur who wants to build a world-class, fabulous semiconductor product company, and necessarily has to go to, let's say, an ARM or a Rambus or a Qualcomm and license specific IP blocks. So there is money set aside for that. There is money set aside for reimbursing the cost of patent filing. If you're doing an international patent, your bill starts at about 25 lakhs and rapidly climbs upwards. So institutionally, both from the center and from the states, Karnataka is one of the earliest leaders in terms of reimbursement of patent filing fees and so on and so forth. So institutional mechanisms have been created with the goal that we can eventually build successful, world-class, world-scale, fabless product companies out of India. There's a mindset issue that also has to be addressed if you want to get innovation up and going, which is a societal problem. In India, it's not okay to fail. But anyone who's with Silicon Valley background will tell you, most VCs will only fund an entrepreneur who he's gone through 1 or 2 failures, because your learnings are much better there. So this is an ongoing challenge, but now, particularly in the last couple of years, the mass media has picked it up. We've got people like yourstory.com and so on and so forth who are celebrating entrepreneurship and basically conveying the message to, let's say, the older generation that it's okay to try and fail. Of course, we would love it if we all tried and succeeded, but then bear in mind the math is that 1 in 7 startups will succeed. In India, it's 1 in 10. But hey, if we knew which of those 10 to put our money on, then we'd all be multimillionaires. And so, in a sense, it's the Hollywood or the Bollywood movie formula. And okay, good old Murphy never goes away, right? Those of you who have run companies will know that doing a merger and an acquisition, I mean, if you're a Qualcomm, you can buy companies and you've got armies of consultants who will take you through the M&A process. But if you are a startup and you're being approached to being acquired, it's hell out there. So now, this is the back end of ease of doing business. You must have read in the Economic Times, the government of the day is obsessed with improving our ease of business doing score. This is the back end of it, where how do you do an exit? Exits are also important because for the VC community to have confidence that India can make it in terms of building valuable companies, they need to see successful exits. So full disclosure, I know the founders of both Cosmic Circuits and Concept of Silicon. These are two very successful exits that have happened in Bangalore, but there are quite a few more. These are both from the semicon space. So just mentioning them there. And finally, you cannot do a startup and build the best technology in the world if it doesn't work with anything else. So I'll give you an example that a friend of mine from the electrical industry told me. He said, we were talking about IoT, and he says, PVG doesn't work because you guys, one vendor's IoT solution doesn't work with somebody else's IoT solution. And then he gave the example of the electrical industry. You can buy a switch or a socket from any vendor. It'll work with anybody else. It'll fit into that panel and so on and so forth. Many, many years ago, a couple of decades ago, I ran the USB business for Philips. And I remember the fights we had to standardize on connectors. Because in the standards business, we knew that the man who owned the connector owned the standard. So there were many, many fights, and I'm talking of 2002, 2003 timeframe, where we were fighting over the definition of connectors. So yeah, that's the part about standards. Let me anticipate a question that I've been asked many times around the country. Why can't we do India-specific standards? Good question. If you're in the technology business, country-specific standards don't work, especially if you're in the semicon business, because a semiconductor company inherently, from day one, has to be global. You cannot survive selling chips to companies making products for India. A systems company might, if you were making, I don't know, set-top boxes, and we have a requirement for about 125 million set-top boxes a year in this country. So if you want to build set-top boxes only for India, and assuming you can get 50% of the market share, which of course makes a huge assumption that your competitors are nice enough to let you take that, then conceivably you can do an India-specific set-top box or product. But if you're making an India-specific chip, God help you, you aren't going to go very far with it. So international standards and some of the standards bodies that I'm associated with, 50% of our work is to make sure that we are aligned with ISO IEC. 50% is to make sure that we have India-specific requirements reflecting into the international standards, and of course also the BIS standards. Okay, this I'm not going to spend time on. You've already gone through this in the morning. The humongous appetite we have, half of the 70 million odd handsets that we ship are smartphones. And it is that number, that 116 million smartphones on your bottom right, which is going to allow all of us to reimagine how we are going to provide services to the India of tomorrow. So the current paradigm, those of you who noticed the very small announcement in the Times of India a couple of months ago, I think about 5 months ago, we overtook the United States in terms of internet users, number of internet users. Of course, I'm told that you've had a PhD thesis dissertation on how people access the mobile, so the internet from the mobile phone in the morning. So I'll skip all this. And yeah, we seem to have, as a country, fascination with social media. So that's reflected in some of these numbers that we have. But essentially, what you're seeing in real time in the last couple of years is, in real time, you're seeing a paradigm shift. Because as late as 3 to 4 years ago, access to the information superhighway was to the privileged few. And today you see that Aam Aadmi has access to the mobile phone. And if you see the kind of user statistics that Reliance Jio has, of course, free data and free internet connectivity is a great way to get users. You will see that the number of people accessing the internet and therefore accessing value-added services is literally going through the roof even as we speak. And so I'm saying, that's my basic thesis. Based on all this, mobility, of course, it is extremely complicated. It's technologically very intensive, but mobility today has to be treated like infrastructure. So let me put it in different ways. You know, if in engineering on a day-to-day basis you're solving extremely complex problems, so you're at, let's say, in aviation terminology, you're at 50 feet. Pull up to about 500 feet and you have a view of the product line. I'm asking you to pull up to 50,000 feet and look at it as a nation. And so you say that just like I have a railway network, I have a road network, I have power plants, I have airports, seaports, similarly I have mobility. Each of these areas that I talked about are technologically extremely complex. If any of you have tried flying into Delhi in the winter, your fingers, toes, everything is crossed until you touch down because of the fog, you don't know if you're going to be landing in Delhi or Ahmedabad. Yeah, I just flew last week and the guy at Indigo was making this big deal about how he was Cat 3 certified, and I was mentally saying, yaar, utar do niche. At 35,000 feet, I don't want to know your qualifications. I just want to know that I'll land safely. The margin for error is a little limited at 35,000 feet. Similarly, if you look at mobility, yeah, there's a lot of debate going on. We don't have spectrum. We have on this band too much clutter. We have a whole bunch of issues, right of way, tower sharing, all of that. But from a policymaker's perspective, yeah, I want to build I want to build a highway, expressway. I have land acquisition issues. Do I use concrete? Do I use bitumen? There's a whole lot of technology issues. Similarly, do I use 4G? Do I use something else? And every day there's a new acronym being added to the alphabet soup that's out there. And yeah, there's a lot of technology in there, but from 50,000 feet, this is just another infrastructure asset that the country has, which essentially means that you have to look at infrastructure from the point of view of security, maintenance, and upgradability. So if you have a power plant, if you have an airport, you have men with guns who stand outside, and men with metal detectors, or women with metal detectors, who will make sure that, if you beep in front of the detector, you're going to be given a very unfriendly look. Digital superhighway, you need to secure it in other ways. Cybersecurity is a whole subject by itself. You need to maintain it, not just physical connectivity, but can you ensure that, as the data packets move on the information superhighway, they're not, they're taking the most optimum path. And finally, upgradation. What is the value add that as a chip company you can give to your users, the device makers, in terms of deep learning, predictive analytics? Can you predict traffic patterns and then open up alternate paths and so on and so forth? And this comes back to, can you reimagine how you will conceive of services and how you will deliver them? Because end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, remember, nothing is possible without infrastructure. Bangalore city is a great example of how cities begin to implode when infrastructure doesn't, face up to the challenge. So let me build this thesis with 3 sectors. I can talk about a whole bunch of things, and I'm deliberately not talking about taxi hailing services or e-commerce. though there are great ways in which people have reimagined what you can do with mobility. I mean, if you look at the app-based taxi hailing services, they looked at the paradigm of transport as it existed and said, why should it be like this? And ever since Ola, Uber, and its cousins have appeared on the scene, I don't think the user experience has been any better. And that's what happens. That's the power of reimagining a paradigm based on an infrastructure asset called mobility. So let's look at healthcare. Again, given my background in running P&L, I have this weakness for numbers. So it's a huge market. Let's just put it that way. And I apologize for the quality of the slide. It was taken off the net. But essentially, the medical electronics market is somewhere between 5 and 6 billion by 2020. And you could say, why this margin of error? That's because with a compounded annual growth rate of 20%, it's very difficult to get an exact fix on where we're going to go and end up. Most people, including the authors of the report, which was KPMG, are sort of saying we'll end up around 5.5 billion, which is a huge market opportunity if you just look at medical electronics. And if you look at the landscape of startups, one of the fastest growing areas is medtech. And again, mobility is taken as granted. All these startups are saying we cannot survive without mobility. So what is this paradigm shift I'm talking about? We've all been used to a paradigm of if you fall sick, you go to a hospital. Now the hospital is coming to you. So anywhere, anytime diagnosis, lab on chip, technician on call, and both these companies that I mentioned there are based out of Bangalore. And both of them have fundamentally rewritten the rules of how healthcare is being delivered. Fortis is in the area of ophthalmology. The only competition is from Carl Zeiss. And you have this very expensive retinal scanner which is installed in a hospital. You need a trained doctor to operate the machine, air conditioning, all of that. And it's a capital investment of upwards of 1 crore. Now this is a bunch of guys from ophthalmology, computer science, and electronics working with eye hospital, the Arvind Eye Hospital in Madurai, which as a hospital has also rewritten the rules of how cataract surgery is done. And they've built a machine which costs 5 lakh rupees or 3 lakh rupees now, can be operated by a paramedical staff. And they're taking it into villages. The first test was done in the villages of southern Tamil Nadu. Ambient temperature 45 degrees, dust, humidity, machine worked flawlessly. And it's been benchmarked with the Carl Zeiss equipment, and it has come on time. I mean, it has come on par every single time. Cardiac Design Labs, another Bangalore-based company which is rewriting the rules of cardiac care. And remember, these are equipments which are helping doctors take diagnostic decisions. This is not an equipment which is being used to, shall I refer him somewhere else to a different lab? So again, mobility taken as infrastructure, completely new way of looking at services, and then you build products in that. Second, the focus on wellness. Most phones today have a whole bunch of movement trackers and so on and so forth. But now this is going upwards. Data is being, you use your phone as a gateway, put the data on the cloud, and then get a, if you've got a patient with chronic disease, let's say diabetes, then constant tracking happens, and the patient need not keep going to the hospital to see the doctor, but you are untethering the patient from the hospital and rewriting the way the whole thing happens. And finally, this has been talked about. I think Manipal Hospital has done some work, so has Narayan Nitrale, the Devi Shetty thing. Narayan Hrudayalaya. And post-operative monitoring, it's a well-known fact that if the longer you stay in a hospital, the higher your chances of getting secondary infections. So the moment your surgery is over and you're able to walk, you're sent home. And then the subsequent monitoring happens from home. As I said, you are looking at the paradigm of how you deliver care and saying, why should it be done like this? Why cannot it be done in a different way? Let's look at education. Very simply, education in India is a mess, particularly low primary education. If you look at the survey that Pratham put out last year, 60% of students in class 7 and class 8 are functionally illiterate. So there's massive amounts of intervention happening in the entire education space. But I'm just focusing on higher education and giving you a sense of the kind of opportunity that exists. Close to 800 universities, 40,000 colleges. The 12,000 standalones are basically the ITIs and all of that. In 2013, we launched, together with the National Skill Development Corporation, we launched a massive intervention into ITIs and engineering colleges, because we figured out it's very easy for us to say that only 10% of graduates from engineering colleges are employable, but then as industry, what are we doing about it? So we did intervention at various levels. So at the graduate level, there is interventions on both curriculum as well as providing industry faculty to go in and teach, which is easier said than done, because as per AICTE guidelines, if you don't have a PhD, you cannot teach. So it took us 2 years to convince the AICTE and the UGC that an MTech from industry with 10 plus years of experience is as good, if not better. I couldn't say better, though we all know it is better than a PhD who graduated 25 years ago, because that PhD who's a full-time teacher is probably way out of date. Whereas the MTech coming in from industry with 10 years experience is absolutely cutting edge current. So we did that at the higher education, at the graduate level. At the technician level, using NSDC funding, we created job roles which are standardized, benchmarked with everything that's available internationally. So whether it is a welding technician, whether it is a maintenance technician, and then we created a certification program. The cost of training for that person is underwritten by what is called the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. It was earlier called the STAR scheme. Now it is rebranded as something or the other. But essentially, the training partner gets 10,000 rupees from the government of India. The money goes to the individual who's getting trained. So it could be an electrician or who's being trained how to do soldering. But then, it's linked to his Aadhaar, so there is no leakage in the system. So it hits the individual's bank account and then goes out to the training provider. The individual is trained. He gets placement assistance, he or she. And as far as India is concerned, we get a better class of technicians and workers. No longer will you be faced, and by the way, this is across industries, so you have training for construction workers, for electricians. I'm sure all of us have faced the situation where you call a plumber or an electrician at home, and the guy lands up, and the first question he'll ask you is, Saab, pliers hai kya? So yeah, I've got nothing better to do than keep pliers, and if I had the pliers and if I knew what to do, why would I call you? Anyway, so we've tried to solve the problem of the gap between skills required and skills being delivered. Again, it's a massive market, $70 billion by next year, and this splits over multiple things, right from smart classrooms to, if any of you saw the interview that this guy who does IIT coaching, Byju's, he's now got an app. So weak students who are going for IIT joint entrance exam coaching and cannot keep up in class have this little app you can download, which connects, and they can do refreshers at home, which is a very smart way if you look at it in terms of running an assembly line, because you don't want the classroom getting clogged up by slow learners, and you don't want to have the slow learners not pass the exam and thereby pull down your rankings in this ultra competitive space called IITG training. Yeah, I've already talked about this. And finally, governance. There's a whole lot of work that's going on around governance. The most visible manifestation is this obsession we have with smart cities. So of course, we have announced 100 smart cities as a nation. The problem is no one really knows how to make a city smart. So at the BIS, we've said, forget the smart city, let's build smart infrastructure. And I'll come to that in a minute, because if you don't have smart infra, then I can guarantee you the city is not going to get smart. Just because you have smart infra, will the city become smart? Jury's out on it. So fundamentally, what is driving this is actually a change in the way governance is being administered and delivered in this country. So historically, if you look at when India became independent, we didn't have a private sector to speak about. What was called the Nehru-Mahalanobis model of development, the first couple of 5-year plans, it was a very patriarchal state. And the state decided what infrastructure it would build, what roads, what dams, what bridges, and the citizen would sort of gratefully acknowledge it. Somewhere in the 80s, of course, the economy had grown, India had become bigger, more complex, citizens had become much more demanding. And the government of India realized, and also the state governments realized, that they were running out of cash. They had a lot of other things to do. And so they introduced this model called PPP, public-private partnership. And they said, listen, we need industry to come forward and pay to build infrastructure. We'll give you a license to operate it. All very nice, except the private partner said, I need to get my money back. And I need to get a toll or a usage charge on an extended period of time. So there's a whole lot of toll roads that have been built. But now there is a problem. The citizen says, you know, if I have to pay to use the service, then hey, I am no longer willing to live with a pothole road, or I'm not willing to live with garbage which is not cleared, or I'm not willing to live with a road which is congested and there are traffic jams. If you expect me to pay 120 rupees to use the road going to the airport, then I expect that road to be, you know, doing what it's supposed to do, which is get me from point A to point B in the shortest possible time. So if you look at it, we are now moving to what I like to call governance 2.0 as a paradigm, which is, this is revolutionary, right? You're asking the government to now sign a service level agreement with the citizen. You're going to tell the government that it's going to commit to giving a minimally accepted level of service, QoS. And for that to happen, you need data. You need analytics. You need the ability to predict where traffic blocks are happening. So in Bangalore, for instance, if you're getting traffic blocking piling up at Marathalli, actually it's a bad case. Traffic piling up at Marathalli, I don't know where you'll decongest. So let me go to Delhi, which has more roads. And if Connaught Place is getting clogged up, I would start decongesting from the Delhi-Noida expressway. Marathalli, I'm sorry, I don't have any answers to Marathalli. So, but essentially what happens is managing all aspects of a city is getting to be a problem. Whether it is water, whether it is garbage, whether it is traffic, whether it is what is broadly called citizen engagement. It's getting to be a challenge to manage that. And the only way you can do it is to get data out there as soon as possible to people who have to administer the whole city. And technology intervention at various levels has to be done. And may I just add, technology intervention has to be done keeping in mind the unique conditions of India. I'll give you one example from a proposal I saw for traffic management in a Western Indian city, not Mumbai, but I won't name the city. Very qualified expert comes in and talks to us about a solution which involved laying pipes to assess traffic conditions at a traffic junction. And I was listening to this individual with a great deal of interest. And I said, tell me, what kind of roads are these going to be laid on? So she looked at me and said, that's a stupid question. Roads are roads. I said, no, you're going to lay pipes on the roads. It may work in the United States because a lot of the roads are built with concrete. In India, the roads have tar on them. Every 6 months, the road is retarred, whether it needs it or not, because somebody is going to make some money on it. And will your sensor work if you get half an inch of or 1 inch of tar on top of it? And suddenly there's pin drop silence in the room, and everyone said, oh yeah. So if you look at an experiment that is being done right now in Yelahanka, at the signal, I think it's Bosch, I'm not sure, but there are cameras now put on every lane. And the cameras have edge detection software running on it. So it can see traffic buildup happening because there's edge detection. Of course, I don't know, I mean, given the fact that we have bullock carts, cars, bikes, cows, how the edge detection is going to work, that's a software challenge. But it's being piloted right now in Bangalore. God knows, we have enough challenges. So maybe Marathalli still has hope. And finally, smart, secure, sustainable. There is this doomsday scenario that a power grid can be brought down by a hacking attack. And I'm sure you've all seen the videos on YouTube of a running Jeep on the highway being brought to a dead halt by a hacker. So security, sustainability, how can you make sure that the sensors you put to detect leakages on underground water pipes, and I don't know if you're aware, 45% of Bangalore's water supply is lost to leakage. The pipes are old. So how can you make sure that the sensors, those little units which are going to measure water pressure, do not need a battery change every month? Can you architect systems which will last for, I don't know, 10 years? Or as somebody at MIT has this cool drug discovery capsule being built where it's piezoelectric current being used to power it. And guess what? The current is coming from the current of the flow of the blood, of the human blood. So there's lots of things. So maybe, water flows on these pipes and you can use that running water to power your devices. But essentially, you need to think out of the box. You need to say that I've got my mobile infrastructure in place, and now I'm going to fundamentally rethink how I will solve a real world problem. And by the way, one final bit on the entrepreneurial opportunities. I'm rather old-fashioned in this. Try and solve real world problems. We're all talking about IoT. I saw a couple of solutions outside which have IoT. And a couple of months ago, I was doing a similar talk somewhere, and somebody walks up to me, and this gentleman is very furious, and he says, India doesn't absorb technology. India, you cannot do make in India. Go and work. I said, okay, very interesting. What are you trying to do? Oh, I'm trying to solve a soil precipitation problem. Fantastic. Sounds like the guy who told me he was a petroleum transfer engineer. Turned out he was an attendant at a gas station. Anyway, so I said, okay, this is great. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Ladies and gentlemen, he had built the ultimate uber expensive. He had built the Louis Vuitton of flower pots. He had a sensor in the flower pot which would sense soil moisture. There was a pipe which was connected to the water main, and it would dribble water in whenever the soil moisture content came down. And the gentleman wanted to sell this flower pot for 10,000 rupees each. So I told him this problem is what is called from Gamla to Kamla. So he got very offended. I said, listen, you have a maid who comes to your house, or do you have small children, or does your neighbor have children? He said, what's your point? I said, tell the maid every alternate day to go and pour half a mug of water into the flower pot. And you can still get the flower pot for $100. So technology is not the be-all and end-all solution to everything. And try and solve real-world problems. Don't invent a solution and then say, hey, gee, I've got this cool solution, now I got a problem to fit it onto. Because I can guarantee you it won't get funded. First hurdle to cross. So, this is, I should have probably put that slide first. So, I was asked to give you an overview of what is the real world problems in India because, you guys live in this lovely environment where you're solving absolutely cutting edge problems which may not be relevant to India. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would love to have a cell phone which can, currently my cell phone doesn't bake bread, though it does try to fry my ear. But, you need to sort of go out and look at solving problems. So the first and foremost thing you'll see is, OG hamare desh mein aise hi hota hai. The not invented here syndrome. If it's never been done before, it can never be done again. Remember what I said, you're reimagining paradigms. I'd like to think of how Bhavesh Agarwal went to RTO in Delhi to get his Ola clearance. And the guy must have looked at it and said, let me get this right. You don't own taxis, you don't have drivers, you have an app on something called the cloud, and you think you can run a taxi service. Okay. Implementation challenges on ground, power. Routers, concentrators, all of them need power. Right of way, extremely important. Whether you want to run cable on the ground, hopefully not put pipes which get covered with bitumen. Manpower, it's very difficult, to get people who can deploy it. Right of way, actually on smart cities, we had a problem because for the traffic management system, we couldn't get right of way because the municipalities were not allowing us to dig the road. So we found a very India-specific solution to that. All the street lights in India are owned by the municipality. So all the cables run on the street lights. And then all you need to do is figure out how to connect the street light to the traffic light or whatever it is, for the camera that I talked about. Technology challenges, big issue, spectrum. There are various proposals in front of TRAI for getting spectrum for M2M. But if you looked at the numbers that are there on the last spectrum auction, 11,000 crores per megahertz. So, yeah, tower sharing, interoperability, security. Particularly after November 8th, UPI has become a big issue, the Universal Payment Interface. The big challenge there to roll it out, who owns the transaction if it breaks down? So you initiate a transaction from your phone, there's a merchant, there's a merchant banking, and then there's a central bank. And if the transaction fails anywhere, who underwrites it? With Visa and MasterCard, they charge you a hell of a lot of money, but they underwrite the transaction. With UPI, that's one of the biggest issues gating rollout. Though I understand there is a committee now which is looking at it. So it's not all gloom and doom. We don't have a choice. We just have to make it happen. And we just have to sort of figure out solutions to the problems. I talked to you about how we solve the right-of-way problem using streetlights. And I'm sure there will be India-specific solutions. I don't want to say jugaad solutions, but India-specific solutions which will help us overcome these challenges. So in conclusion, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. What is the goal that we want to set ourselves, when we come up with either solutions or new products? What is the goal that we want to set ourselves in this country? Do we want to be just a low-cost manufacturer? Mexico tried it in the 70s and the 80s. China did it in the 90s and the 2000s. Cost is fleeting. Cost advantages are fleeting. Today, companies are leaving China because China is just way too expensive. We try to bring textiles to India, and then guess what? Bangladesh is cheaper than India to do textiles. So what is it that we want to do? Second, we've got all these youngsters, all of you. How do we leverage the collective brains of, 600, 125 crore to bahut zyada ho gaya. How do we leverage the brains of 600 million Indians and build a powerhouse out of our electronics industry? And finally, I'm a firm believer in what I like to call innovation-led design, design-led manufacturing, which means we identify a problem, we design an innovative solution, we manufacture that solution here, but the solution is both world class in terms of conceptualization, in terms of design, and in terms of manufacturing. And how can we build products which are conceived in India, designed in India, made in India, but sold and used worldwide? So I'll leave you with these thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions. Thank you for the candid talk, sir. We'll take a few questions now from the audience. Oh, sure, we're out of time? Okay,
completely out of
all
time.
right, sure. Okay. All right. I'll now request Srini Madali, sir, to come on stage to hand over a token of appreciation to PVG Menon, sir.
Thank you. Can I give this talk to someone too? Oh, sorry.